France is once again stressing that Europe should not shut itself off from Russia, but keep a direct line of dialogue open. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot says Europe now provides nearly all of Ukraine's financial support, as well as a major share of its military and intelligence assistance. Because of that, he argues European countries need their own direct channel to Moscow to defend their interest rather than leaving that role to others. At the same time, Paris says there are no real signs that dictator Putin wants to end the war. The French minister pointed to continued strikes on civilian targets in Ukraine, calling them war crimes. So France is positioning itself on two tracks at once: firm support for Ukraine and willingness to keep direct communication with Russia open. Putin could send former convicts and war veterans across Europe once a ceasefire is reached in Ukraine. That is the warning coming from Estonia's foreign minister. In Tallinn, officials say a pause in the war may not mean the end of Russian aggression, but the start of a different kind, hybrid and hidden. According to Estonian estimates, up to 1.5 million Russian citizens may have taken part in the war against Ukraine. Hundreds of thousands of them have combat experience, and some have criminal backgrounds. Estonian officials say these people could be used to destabilize EU countries. They point to the risk of arson, sabotage, attacks on critical infrastructure, and provocations inside European cities. Estonia is now calling for a full ban of Russian soldiers entering the Schengen zone, restrictions on work visas and residence permits, and close coordination with the United Kingdom. In London, officials say border security is a matter of national security and that allies are preparing to work together to counter threats from Russia. In the front line in Ukraine freezes, the conflict may not disappear. It could move into Europe's cities in a hybrid form. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says he expects the United States to remain actively involved in the peace process and to continue supporting Ukraine at the same level as before. He made the statement while confirming the date of the next round of trilateral talks. Delegations from Ukraine, the United States and Russia are set to meet in Abu Dhabi this week on Wednesday and Thursday. Before that, the Ukrainian team will hold a preparatory meeting to agree on the framework and finalize all organizational details. At the same time, Western media report that major breakthroughs on territorial issues are unlikely for now. According to The Economist, the most difficult topics, control over Donbas and security guarantees, remain unresolved. Sources say the talks may bring technical progress, but not political decision. The second round of negotiations was originally scheduled earlier, but was postponed after a separate meeting in Florida between U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and Kremlin representative Kirill Dmitriev. The U.S. side described that meeting as constructive as always. Despite this, analysts believe there will be no significant shift in positions, at least until March. Russia is expected to maintain military pressure, while Ukraine insists it will not compromise on Donbas or its sovereignty.
We expect that the American side will be just as active, and in particular, this concerns de-escalation measures, reducing strikes. A lot depends on what the American side will succeed in, so that people trust both the process and the results, of course.
While diplomats prepare for the next round of talks in Abu Dhabi, the reality on the ground in Ukraine tells a very different story. In Dnipro, a Russian drone struck a bus carrying mine workers home after their shift. Ukraine's emergency services say at least 15 people were killed and 7 others were injured. The impact sparked a fire, which was later put out by rescuers. Ukraine's largest private energy company, DTEK, said the bus belonged to one of its enterprises and accused Russia of a targeted attack on its mines in the Dnipropetrovsk region. The company said one of the strikes hit the bus as it was transporting workers. Days after statements about a temporary pause in strikes on the major Ukrainian cities and talk of de-escalation. But only hours later, in Zaporizhia, Russian drones hit near a maternity hospital, injuring at least 6 people. President Zelenskyy calling the strike on the bus a crime and a clear sign of who is driving the escalation.
Today's Russian attack on a bus in the Dnipro region is a crime, a showy crime, which once again demonstrates that Russia is responsible for the escalation. Evil must stop.
90 billion euros, that's the size of the credit line the European Union is opening for Ukraine, for weapons and for recovery. Under the current plan, Kyiv would not repay this loan from its own budget, but through future Russian reparations using frozen Russian assets. And now, around this 90 billion euros, a major European power game is beginning. As the Financial Times reports, Brussels is debating whether the United Kingdom should pay the EU for the right to supply weapons to Ukraine under this credit program. That would mean access to contracts for air defense systems, missiles, drones, and even fighter aircraft. The European Commission wants 2/3 of the money to be spent mainly on arms produced inside the EU. Buying from third countries would be allowed only if there are no European alternatives or if deliveries can be significantly sped up. Germany, Poland, and the Netherlands are pushing to include the UK on the list of approved partners. France, according to Financial Times, is taking a different line. If London wants to be a part of the scheme, it should help carry the financial burden. In Brussels, that entry price is being discussed at around 20 billion euros. For Ukraine, this could mean a wider choice of suppliers and potentially faster deliveries. For Britain, a chance to step back into Europe's defense architecture, not just a political ally, but as a financial player. And for the EU, a way to turn military support for Kyiv into a long-term structured system rather than a series of one-off decisions. Why Moscow keeps raising the stakes? A Ukrainian analyst, Valery Pekar, offers a stark way to look at Russia's war strategy. He does not describe it as a military campaign or a diplomatic chess match. He describes it as a psychological game, closer to a poker table than a negotiating room. The idea is that Moscow does not see stopping as a success. In this view, even slowing down or freezing the war looks like weakness. So instead of trying to secure what it already controls, the Kremlin keeps pushing forward, even when the price is high. Looking back at the past 4 years, there were several moments when Russia could have chosen a less risky path. Before the full-scale invasion, many expected threats and pressure, not an all-out war. After the early military setbacks, there was a chance to limit the conflict and hold on to captured territory. Later, with growing economic strain and international pressure, negotiations could have become a way out. Each time escalation won. This pattern suggests that decisions in Moscow are driven less by a cost-benefit calculations and more by how power and strength are perceived. The goal is not just to gain territory or concessions, but to avoid any sign of retreat. There is also a common fear that such a strategy must end in nuclear confrontation. The argument here is that nuclear weapons serve mainly as a tool of deterrence and self-preservation, not as a way to win the war. The pressure is meant to stay inside the game, not to destroy it. The United Nations is facing a financial crisis, with its leadership warning of the risk of a serious cash shortfall due to unpaid contributions from member states. Against that backdrop, Donald Trump delivered a sharp response, saying he would solve the UN's funding problems the same way he claims he once made NATO members pay their dues. In an interview with a Politico, Trump said it would be enough to call member states and demand that they meet their financial obligations. In his view, the problem lies not with the UN system, but with those who fail to pay. He did not clarify whether the United States would settle its own multi-billion-dollar arrears to the organization. At the same time, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has urged countries in a letter to ambassadors either to pay their required contributions or to change budget rules so the UN can retain unused funds and keep its programs running. What is at stake are humanitarian operations, peacekeeping missions, and the work of UN agencies across the globe. The next war, in Russia's own thinking, may not be led by tanks. It may be led by swarms of drones. That's the shift described in a Russian military analysis reviewed by Defense Express. The idea is simple and sharp. Ukraine's massive use of drones is forcing Moscow to rethink the role of heavy weapons, from tanks and helicopters to large mechanized units. The author argued that the era of elite tanks divisions is fading. In its place, they see armadas of drones shaping the battlefield. As electronic gets cheaper and smaller, and as network systems and AI improve, larger groups of low-cost drones can be deployed to strike deep behind the front line and overwhelm traditional defenses. In this model, the main fight becomes a battle for drone fire superiority. Control the sky at the drone level and you control movement, supply and territory on the ground. That's why Russian analysts say counter-drone system and clearing the sky should become the top priority. There is also a financial angle. Defense notes that Russia's economy may not be able to fund everything at once: tanks, helicopters, artillery and drones. They point to failed next-generation tanks projects like Object 195 and the T-14 Armata, which never reached real mass production, leaving Russia reliant on upgraded older models. This isn't a settled doctrine yet. It's a debate inside Russia's military and political leadership. In Kyiv, winter means cold homes, dark rooms, and waiting for the lights to come back on after another night of Russian attacks. When apartments go quiet and radiators stay cold, people look for another place to get through the day. So they come to the Dnipro, onto the frozen river. Children slide down icy hills. Parents hold hot cups in frozen hands. Music plays while less than an hour earlier, Ukraine's Energy Ministry reports emergency power outage across the Kyiv, Zhytomyr and Kharkiv regions. Some here are from Donetsk and Lugansk, cities occupied since 2014. Peace talks are back in the headlines, but on the ice, people say a frozen front line would only delay the fighting, not end it. Latest city officials say power and heating are slowly being restored. One of the women here describes what the winter feels like at home.
We haven't had heating for almost 3 weeks now. Sometimes we hear that they're starting the system, meaning they drain the water and then start it up. But the radiators don't even get warm. They barely heat up at all, maybe to about 30%, and then everything just runs through the pipes.
That's all for now. For more content, please subscribe.